30 days, 30 small English habits. The method that actually works. Segment 1. Narrator, Daniel. There are moments in life that do not shout. They whisper, slow, quiet, heavy. These moments tell you something is wrong long before you admit it. My moment arrived on a normal night, a night that looked like every other night. I was sitting in my room. My desk lamp was on, my phone was in my hand, and one simple message stared back at me. Hey Daniel, can we talk? I need your help. I read it twice. I understood every word, but I did not reply. Not because I was busy, not because I did not care. I did not reply because I knew the conversation would be in English, and I felt that familiar pressure in my chest, that old fear, that small voice that always tells me you will sound stupid and you will make mistakes and you will freeze again. I placed the phone face down and took a long breath, a breath I had taken 1,000 times before. And in that moment, I finally faced the truth I had been avoiding for years. I was not afraid of English. I was afraid of myself in English, afraid of how I sounded, afraid of what others thought, afraid of the silence after a mistake, afraid of the look people give when they do not understand you. I knew vocabulary, I knew grammar, I had studied all the rules, but I could not speak without fear. That night I said something to myself that hurt. It hurt because it was true. Daniel, you are not improving because you are not practicing. You are not practicing because you are afraid. And you are afraid because you have no habits. That was it. One simple truth. I had no English habits, not daily, not weekly, not even monthly. I studied only when I felt motivated, and motivation never stayed. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, then I opened my notebook. I wrote one sentence, 30 days, 30 habits, no excuses. I did not know if it would work, but I knew I had to try something. Not a big plan, not a perfect plan, just a simple human plan, something small, something I could do even on my worst day. I wrote the first rule. The habits must be small enough to do when I am tired, when I am stressed, when I have no energy, because big habits look powerful, but small habits build power. Then I wrote the second rule. No 0 days. Even if I do only 1 minute, even if it is nothing, it still counts, because the brain learns from consistency. Then I wrote the third rule. Do not expect results, expect effort. Let results come quietly. When I finished writing, something changed inside me, not hope, not confidence, something even smaller, something that felt like a door unlocking just a little. The next morning, day 1 began. I woke up and made tea. My hands were still shaking with the old fear. I opened YouTube and chose a short English video. Only 5 minutes. Nothing complicated, just listening. That was habit 1. Listen for 5 minutes with full attention. No multitasking, no scrolling, just listening. At first it felt useless, too small, too simple. But something strange happened. I understood more than I expected. That tiny win did something powerful. It made me want to do day 2. On day 2, the habit was simple again. Read 1 paragraph out loud. I was nervous, my voice cracked. I mispronounced words, but I finished it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a small sense of control. Day 3. Learn 5 natural English phrases, not fancy words. Real phrases people use every day, things like actually and to be honest, and I guess so, and that makes sense. When I practiced them in front of the mirror, I realized something important. Fluency is not about perfect grammar. Fluency is about comfort. By day 4, something subtle started shifting. I was not fluent. I was not confident. But I was consistent, and consistency creates a different kind of energy, a quiet belief, a belief that maybe I am not stuck, maybe I can change, maybe I can grow. And in those early days, I understood the real purpose of this challenge. It was not to fix my English, it was to fix my relationship with English, to turn fear into familiarity, to turn hesitation into habit, to turn confusion into small daily progress. This was not a challenge anymore. It was the beginning of a transformation I never expected. Segment 2. Narrator Daniel. Day 5 began differently. The morning light came through my window, and for the first time in years, I did not wake up with that heavy English fear sitting in my chest. It was still there, but quieter, smaller, like it had finally taken a few steps back. I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. I had written a list the night before, a list of small habits that did not look powerful in the beginning, but if repeated for 30 days, could change something deep inside me. I chose the next habit and read it silently. Record yourself for 1 minute. No editing, no deleting, no judging. This habit made me uncomfortable before I even started. The idea of hearing my own English voice felt almost painful. I had avoided it my whole life. I always thought my voice sounded strange. My accent felt too heavy. My pauses felt too long. My mistakes felt too big. But I pressed record. I introduced myself. I said something about my morning. I forced myself to keep talking even when my mind froze for a second. And when the minute ended, I pressed play. The recording was not perfect. I heard mistakes. I heard hesitation. But I also heard something new. I sounded better than I expected. Not good, not fluent, but better. And that small surprise gave me a quiet hope. It was the first time I saw myself improving from the outside. That became habit 5. Face your own voice, not run from it. On day 6, I added something even smaller. I wrote 5 sentences about my day in simple English. Nothing complex, nothing dramatic, just a small reflection. The goal was not grammar, the goal was repetition, the goal was making English a natural part of my daily thoughts. Day 7 was a turning point. The habit was shadowing. Listen, pause, repeat, follow the rhythm of the speaker. At first I felt awkward. I thought I sounded nothing like the person in the video. My timing was off. My voice broke in the middle of phrases. But I kept going. And something unexpected happened. After 10 minutes of shadowing, my pronunciation felt smoother. Not perfect, but smoother. I felt my mouth learning shapes my mind could not teach. Shadowing became one of the most powerful habits in the entire challenge, even though it looked simple. When day 8 arrived, the fear returned. The habit was talking to a real person, not a long conversation, not a deep discussion, just a small interaction in English. I walked to a local coffee shop. My hands felt cold. My voice felt trapped. I rehearsed the line again and again. Then I stood in front of the cashier and said, "Good morning, how are you today?" It was a normal sentence, simple, no heavy vocabulary. But for me, it was a personal victory. The cashier answered with a smile. I replied with a few more words. And in that short exchange, I felt something shift. I felt English belonging to the world, not just to my fear. On day 9, I chose a habit that focused on clarity. Speak slowly for 5 minutes. Slow, clear, calm. This habit changed more than my English. It changed my mindset. Speaking slowly told my brain that I was not rushing, I was not panicking, I was not fighting the language, I was using it at my own pace. Day 10 arrived with a habit that looked almost too small. learn one new phrase, and use it twice that day. I chose the phrase to be honest. I used it in a message to a friend. Then I used it in my self recording. And by the end of the day, that phrase felt natural. When something becomes natural, it stops being a lesson, it becomes a tool. By day 11, I started noticing a pattern. Every habit was tiny, almost invisible, but each one made the next habit easier. The challenge was not building skills, the challenge was building momentum. On day 12, I practiced 10 minutes of listening without translation. It was harder than I expected. My mind tried to translate every word into my first language, but I kept pulling it back. Slowly, the meaning became clearer, even without translation. That was the first step toward thinking in English. Day 13 was about mistakes. I wrote down 3 mistakes I made during the week. Then I wrote the correct forms next to them. No judgment, no stress, just awareness. Improvement begins with awareness. By day 14, I realized something important. English was no longer a task, it was becoming a habit, a part of my day, a part of my routine, a part of my identity. I had not transformed yet. I was not fluent, but I was moving. Before this challenge, English felt like a wall. Now it felt like a door that was opening one tiny inch at a time. The first 14 days taught me a truth I had avoided my entire life. You do not become fluent by studying more. You become fluent by living with the language daily, consistently, quietly, slowly. And that is how the real transformation begins. Segment 3. Narrator Daniel Day. 15 began with a different kind of silence. Not the old silence of fear, not the silence that made my chest heavy. This was a new silence, a stillness, a calm before the next step. I sat by my window watching the morning light move across my desk, and I realized something important. 2 weeks had passed, and I had not skipped a single day. That had never happened before. I had tried so many study plans in my life, grammar books, long YouTube lessons, complicated routines, and I always stopped. Not because the content was bad, because the habits were too big, too heavy, too demanding. This time was different. The challenge was simple, the habits were small, and small things are easier to carry every day. Day 15's habit was something unusual. Speak for 2 minutes without planning. No script, no notes, just talk. Talk about anything, my morning, my room, my goals, my worries. I pressed record and started speaking. At first it felt strange. I repeated myself, I paused too long, I lost words, but something happened after the first minute. The words started flowing. They were not perfect, but they were mine. And that was enough. On day 16, I tried a habit that felt almost too easy. Watch a short English clip and imitate the tone of the speaker. Not the accent, the tone, the emotion, the rhythm, the way they carried their sentences. I realized I had spent years trying to sound perfect, but never tried to sound natural. Tone matters more than accent. Tone communicates confidence even when grammar is simple. Day 17 was about reading. Not long reading, not textbook reading, just one page of something I enjoyed, a story, an article, a post. When the mind enjoys what it reads, language enters faster. I noticed something small. When I read aloud, my pronunciation improved. When I read silently, my understanding grew. Both were needed. Day 18 surprised me. The habit was practicing only one sentence, one single sentence for the whole day. I chose a simple one. I'm trying to improve my English. I repeated it in different tones. I said it slowly. I said it confidently. I said it quietly. I said it to myself while walking. That one sentence became a mirror. It showed me rhythm. It showed me breath. It showed me control. And by the end of the day, it felt natural. Day 19 brought something new. I watched a native conversation and tried to catch only the expressions. Not the details, not every word, just the expressions, phrases like, you know what I mean, and at the end of the day, and I see what you're saying. These expressions carry meaning beyond grammar. Understanding expressions is understanding the soul of a language. Day 20 arrived with a habit that tested me. Speak English for 5 minutes with zero fear of mistakes, no corrections, no apologies, no restarting, just talk. Mistakes included, imperfections allowed. I realized something during that exercise. Most of the fear of English does not come from the language. It comes from the expectation of perfection. When perfection leaves, confidence enters. Day 21 was quiet but meaningful. I listened to English while doing something simple, like walking or cleaning, background listening. My mind absorbed patterns without pressure. Sometimes passive learning works better than active learning. On day 22, the habit focused on clarity. Say a single idea in the simplest form. No complicated sentences, no big vocabulary, just clear English. I learned that clarity is not about advanced words. Clarity is about choosing the right words. Day 23 asked something bold. Talk to myself in English for 10 minutes. Not out loud, but in my mind. Thinking in English is a slow process, but it starts with small internal phrases. What am I doing now? Why am I doing this? What do I want next? These small questions create a bridge between languages. Day 24 was about listening again, but this time I listened to something slightly above my level, not too difficult, just challenging enough to push me. Difficult input makes the mind stretch, easy input gives confidence. Both are necessary. On day 25, I wrote 3 goals in English: clear, simple, personal. I want to speak without fear. I want to think in English more. I want to sound natural. Writing goals in the target language makes them feel closer. Day 26 focused on pronunciation, but instead of practicing random words, I practiced the words I use daily, words that actually mattered to my life. Familiarity brings fluency faster than complexity. Day 27 introduced a habit I wish I had learned earlier: slow English. Speak slowly on purpose. Not because I am afraid, but because I want to maintain control. When I slowed down, everything improved. Pronunciation, confidence, understanding, speed does not create fluency, control does. Day 28 was a reflection day. I listened to my recordings from week 1, and I felt something powerful. I could hear the difference, not dramatic, but real. I was clearer, stronger, more controlled. This was the first time I believed I could fully change. Day 29 was simple. Use English in one real situation: a message, a call, a short conversation. Practice in real life creates the confidence classroom practice never gives. And then day 30 arrived. The final day, the last habit, the moment the challenge came full circle. It was time to choose who I wanted to be after these 30 days. The habits had changed me, not because they were big, but because they were small enough to stay. This is where the true transformation begins. Segment 4. Narrator Daniel. The morning after day 30 felt different. I woke up with a strange mixture of pride and uncertainty. pride because I had completed something I once believed I could never finish. Uncertainty because I did not know what would happen next. A challenge is easy when there is structure, when there is a list, when there is a clear plan. But what happens after the plan ends? What happens when the routine must come from within, not from a checklist? I sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and looked at the empty page. For a moment, I felt a familiar fear, the same fear I used to feel before speaking English. The fear of starting again, the fear of doing something without guidance. But then I reminded myself of something simple. Habits were never about 30 days, they were about building a new identity. Day 30 was the end of the challenge, but it was the beginning of a new stage. I decided to review the entire journey. I opened the earlier pages, the ones where my handwriting was shaky, the ones where my sentences were short, the ones where the fear was bigger than the goal. Then I flipped through the later pages. My writing looked different. My thoughts sounded different. There was more clarity, more confidence, more control. And that was when I understood something important. English did not change me. My habits did. I decided that segment 4 of my journey, the part you're hearing now, would be about understanding the deeper layers beneath each habit. Because habits are not only actions, they are mirrors. They show who you are becoming. The first mirror was consistency. Consistency had always been impossible for me. I would start strong for 3 days and disappear for 10. I used to think I lacked discipline, but the truth was simpler. My past routines were unrealistic, too big, too heavy, too ambitious. Small habits taught me that consistency is not about strength, it is about design. When a habit is small, the brain accepts it. When a habit is manageable, motivation becomes optional. That was the first identity shift. I was no longer a person who tried. I became a person who continued. The second mirror was confidence, not the loud confidence people show on the outside, the quiet one that grows from repeated wins, the confidence that forms when you hear improvements in your own voice, when you understand a sentence you once missed, when you speak without rehearsing every word. Confidence grows the same way a plant grows, slowly, silently, daily. And suddenly one day you notice it. You notice you no longer freeze when someone speaks fast. You notice you no longer fear your own pronunciation. You notice that hesitation visits you less often. The third mirror was identity. I realized something unexpected. People do not become fluent when they master grammar. They become fluent when they start seeing themselves as English speakers, not learners, speakers. When I started thinking of myself as someone who uses English instead of someone who studies English, everything shifted. I stopped asking myself, am I improving? And started asking myself, how much can I express today? I stopped worrying about sounding perfect and started focusing on sounding clear. I stopped comparing myself with native speakers and started comparing myself with my own day one. The fourth mirror was something deeper, fear. Fear had controlled my English journey for years. It shaped my decisions. It shaped my silence. It shaped my hesitation. But something unusual happened during the 30 days. The fear did not disappear. It transformed. It changed shape. It became smaller. It became something I could walk with instead of running from. Fear will always exist. But this time, it no longer had the power to stop me. On the morning after the challenge, I gave myself a final test. Not a big test, something simple. I made a short phone call in English, something I had avoided for years. My voice was not perfect, my timing was not perfect, but I spoke, I responded, I continued. And when the call ended, I felt something powerful. I did not feel proud because I was perfect. I felt proud because I had acted in spite of imperfection. That is the true purpose of habits. They do not remove fear, they make you stronger than your fear. Later that evening, I went for a walk. As I walked, I thought about what this journey meant, not just for my English, but for my life. It made me rethink everything. How many things in life seem impossible simply because we try to solve them with big changes instead of small habits? How many dreams die because people expect transformation instead of small improvements? Small habits taught me that change happens quietly. Quiet change is the strongest kind of change. It stays, it lasts, it becomes part of you. As the sun started to set, I understood something. The 30-day challenge was not about English alone. It was a blueprint for any kind of growth, confidence, skills, mindset, discipline. All of them grow the same way, slowly, daily, consistently. This was the reality of my transformation, and this was only the halfway point. There was more to learn, more to face, more to build. The next chapters would not be easier, but they would be clearer, because I was no longer the person who feared English. I was becoming the person who lived with it. Segment 5. Narrator Daniel. The second half of the journey began on a quiet morning. I woke up earlier than usual, not because of an alarm, not because of pressure. I woke up because I wanted to. That was new for me. For years, English had been a weight on my mind, heavy, constant, uncomfortable, but now it felt different. It felt like something I could carry without fear. Day 31 was not part of the challenge, but it felt like an extension of it. I began by listening to my old recordings again, not to judge, not to compare, just to understand. When I heard my day one voice, something struck me. I could hear fear in my pauses. I could hear tension in my breathing. I could hear uncertainty in every sentence. When I listened to my day 30 voice, I noticed something else. My sentences were clearer, my pauses were smoother, my tone was calmer. It was not dramatic improvement, it was honest improvement, the kind that grows quietly. I wrote a note to myself: real change is slow, and slow change is strong. Day 31's habit was not about speaking or reading, it was about something deeper. It was about seeing myself differently. For the first time in years, I called myself an English speaker instead of an English learner. One simple label changed the way my mind behaved. When you call yourself a speaker, your brain looks for opportunities to speak. When you call yourself a learner, your brain waits for lessons. Identity shapes action. On day 32, I returned to shadowing. But this time I focused only on one thing: flow. Not pronunciation, not speed, flow. The natural movement of words, the rise and fall of sentences, the music within the language. After 10 minutes, something interesting happened. My voice followed the speaker without as much struggle. Not exact, but closer, and it felt easier than before. Day 33 was about listening to fast English, something I always avoided. Speed used to intimidate me, it created pressure. A voice in my mind always said, "You will not understand this." But this time I approached it differently. I did not try to catch every word. I tried to catch ideas, the main points, the emotions, the intentions, and surprisingly, I understood more than I expected. Understanding does not come from speed, It comes from familiarity. Day 34 introduced a habit that changed the way I viewed mistakes. I listened to a native speaker make a mistake, a real mistake, a small one, then another, and I realized something important. Mistakes are normal, even in native English. The difference is simple. They keep speaking, they do not freeze, they do not overthink, they correct themselves naturally. If native speakers allow themselves to be imperfect, why couldn't I? Day 35 brought a new practice: emotional English, speaking while expressing real emotion, happiness, frustration, sadness, excitement. When I practiced sentences with emotion, I discovered something meaningful. Emotion makes language feel more natural. When I spoke with emotion, my voice sounded clearer. My sentences sounded smoother. My hesitation decreased. Emotion creates authenticity. Day 36 was a writing day. I wrote a short story in simple English. Nothing complex. Just a small story about a moment in my life. When I finished, I read it aloud. And for the first time, I felt connected to the language. Writing in English made me think in English. Thinking in English made me speak with more confidence. On day 37, I practiced conversations in my mind. Internal English, silent English, the kind that happens when you walk or wait or sit alone. I asked myself questions, I answered them, I narrated what I was doing. This habit built something powerful: mental fluency. Before you speak fluently, you must think fluently. Day 38 tested my reaction skills. I played a short English clip, paused it after every sentence, and reacted in English. Not repeating, responding, giving my own thoughts. This created a sense of real conversation, real interaction. Reaction builds confidence faster than memorization. Day 39 was a reflection day. I wrote down all the habits from the past month. 30 habits that once felt small, too small, but now they stood like a staircase. Each habit a step, each step leading me somewhere I once believed I could never reach. And then came day 40, a symbolic day, not part of the original challenge, but a continuation of the identity I had built. That morning I made a decision. I would speak English daily, not perfectly, not fearfully, naturally, calmly, consistently. The transformation was not complete, but the foundation was strong. I no longer needed motivation, I had habits. I no longer needed confidence, I had clarity. I no longer needed perfection, I had progress. Segment 5 marked the realization that small habits had done something extraordinary. They changed the way I saw English, they changed the way I saw myself, and now it was time to take everything I had learned into the next phase of growth. Segment 6. Narrator Daniel. The next stage of my journey began without a date written on a calendar. There was no official day 41, no new list of habits, no structured challenge. What came next was simpler and more difficult at the same time. Life, real life, the place where habits either grow stronger or slowly disappear. I woke early that morning, not because I had a task, but because my mind had learned to wake with purpose. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The city outside was just beginning to move. Cars, footsteps, morning voices, and I realized something important. English was not a challenge now. It was a companion, a part of my routine. The fear I used to feel was no longer sharp. It was distant now, quiet, manageable. The habit for this stage was something the challenge could not teach. The habit of doing it without being told. The habit of choosing English even when no one is watching. I opened my notebook and wrote a simple line. Continue naturally. That became the theme of this chapter. On the first morning of this new phase, I tried something I had avoided my whole life. I watched an English interview without subtitles, not to test myself, not to prove anything, just to observe. At first, I missed details, I missed small jokes, I missed quick transitions, but I understood the general flow. That alone surprised me. In the past, I believed I needed subtitles to survive. Now I was understanding without them. Not perfectly, but comfortably. And comfort is stronger than perfection. That morning, I wrote something in my notebook. Understanding grows before confidence appears. Later that day, I tried another exercise, not planned, not forced. I simply started thinking in English about the tasks I needed to do: make breakfast, clean the room, reply to emails. These small thoughts, once automatic in my first language, were slowly shifting into English. I did not tell them to shift. They moved on their own. Thinking in English was no longer a dream. It was becoming an unconscious habit, something that lived in the background of my mind. On the second day, I practiced something I had always feared: spontaneous speaking, no preparation, no safe topic. I pressed record and spoke about whatever came to mind: a memory, a feeling, a question. At first, I repeated myself. I circled around ideas. I paused often, but something new happened. I did not feel embarrassed. I did not feel frustrated. I felt present. Speaking without planning builds a different kind of fluency. It teaches the brain to move forward even when it does not know the perfect word. And that is the deepest form of confidence. Later that week, something interesting happened. I joined a short video call with a colleague. It was not planned, not scheduled. I had no time to prepare sentences. Our conversation lasted only a few minutes. But during that time, I noticed that something inside me had changed. I was not translating. I was not freezing. I was not overthinking. I was responding. There were small mistakes, but they did not bother me. They did not control the tone of the conversation. They did not slow me down. They were simply part of the process. Natural, normal, acceptable. On the following days, I continued speaking in small ways: a message reply, a short voice note, ordering something, asking a simple question. The world became my practice space. English was no longer a subject. It was a tool I now used without fear. But the biggest change came on a quiet afternoon. I met an acquaintance who was learning English just like me. He spoke with the same hesitation I used to have, the same fear in his pauses, the same doubt in his tone. And for the first time, I found myself encouraging someone else. I told him something I had learned the hard way. The small habits matter more than big promises. Start tiny, move slowly, continue daily. Do not fight the language, live with it, let it become familiar. As I spoke those words, I realized I was not repeating wisdom from a book. I was speaking from experience, my own experience. The transformation was real because it was lived. By the end of that week, I understood something deeper. Growth is not measured by perfect sentences. Growth is measured by moments. The moment you reply without fear, the moment you understand without subtitles, the moment you express yourself without preparing every word, the moment you choose English even when no one asks you to. These moments are subtle, quiet. They do not announce themselves, but they mark the beginning of a new identity. When I reached this stage, I understood that my journey was no longer about 30 days. It was about the person I became because of those 30 days, a person who no longer allows fear to decide his voice, a person who steps into conversations instead of stepping back, a person who accepts mistakes as part of movement, not proof of failure. Segment 6 marked the beginning of integration, the stage where English stopped being an obstacle and became a part of my life. But there were still deeper layers to explore. Challenges I had not faced yet, walls I had not climbed, and those would come in the final chapters. Segment 7, Narrator Daniel. By the time this phase began, English was no longer a fear I carried. It had become a space I lived in, not perfectly, not fearlessly, but honestly. And this honesty brought me face to face with something I had avoided for years: real communication. Not practice, not exercises, real conversations with real people. Day after day, I started noticing moments where English appeared naturally in my life. Small moments that I once ignored, but now they carried meaning. Growth does not always appear in progress charts. It appears in the quiet way you move through the world. On a Monday morning, something unexpected happened. I received a message from an old friend who had moved abroad. He wanted to catch up. Nothing unusual. Except this time I did not hesitate. I did not freeze. I did not stare at the message for 10 minutes trying to find courage. I simply replied, "Yes, I'm free. Let's talk." That small action felt like a milestone, a silent victory, the kind that does not need applause. It proved that the habits had changed my instincts, my natural reaction. Fear was no longer the first voice inside my mind. Calmness had replaced it. When the call began, I realized something even bigger. I was not panicking about pronunciation. I was not mentally rehearsing my sentences. I was listening. I was responding. I was present. The conversation flowed with small hesitations but without fear. And for the first time, I felt like an equal, not a learner trying to survive. After the call, I wrote something in my notebook. Fluency begins the moment you stop performing and start communicating. Later that week, I faced another quiet test. I needed to explain a small issue to a service provider. In the past, I would have avoided this situation. I would have waited for someone else to help, or I would have tried to solve it without talking to anyone. But this time, I walked into the conversation calmly, slowly, step by step. The conversation was simple: a few sentences, a few clarifications, a few natural pauses. But the important part was not the content, it was the feeling. I was not surviving English, I was using it. Something inside me had shifted permanently. On the 4th day of the week, I returned to a habit that once terrified me: reading aloud in public, not a speech, not a presentation, just simple reading in a quiet corner of a library. My voice was steady now. Not perfect, but steady. When a stranger walked past me, I did not stop reading. My voice did not break. My confidence did not collapse. That moment reminded me how far I had come. Months ago, I could not read a paragraph in front of my own mirror without feeling judged by myself. Now, I was reading aloud in a public space without fear. Progress is not a moment. It is a collection of moments. The next day, I tried something different. I watched a debate in English, a fast debate, one where speakers interrupt each other and move quickly. In the past, I avoided this type of content because it made me feel slow and incapable. But now I approached it with curiosity, not fear. I missed details. I misunderstood some lines, but I understood enough to follow the topic, enough to form an opinion, enough to stay engaged, and enough to feel that the language no longer controlled my pace. I controlled my response. On the weekend, I decided to challenge myself further. I visited a community meetup where people from different countries gathered to practice languages. I had always avoided such events because I believed my English was not strong enough. This time I walked in with steady confidence. I introduced myself, I joined a small group. The conversations were simple, friendly, scattered with small mistakes from everyone. The room was a mix of accents, levels, and experiences. And it struck me that English did not belong to native speakers alone. It belonged to all of us who used it to connect. As I spoke to different people, I noticed how natural everything felt. I was no longer controlling every word. I was expressing meaning. And meaning matters more than grammar. That day taught me a lesson I will never forget. Fluency is not about speaking fast. Fluency is the ability to express your thoughts without fear holding your tongue. By the end of the week, I had a clearer understanding of where I stood. Not perfect, not fluent by textbook standards, but fluent enough to live, work, think, and connect in English. Fluent enough to trust myself. As the evening approached, I took a quiet walk and reflected on everything. The small habits had done more than improve my English. They had changed my relationship with myself. They taught me patience. They taught me persistence. They taught me to look at progress not as a destination, but as a daily practice. Segment 7 marked one truth. You become fluent not when you finish learning English, but when English becomes a natural part of your life. And now only one stage remained. The final chapter. The moment where everything I learned would come together. Segment 8. Narrator Daniel. The final stage of this journey did not begin with a challenge, a task, or a habit. It began with a question I never dared to ask myself before. A question that quietly defines the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Who am I now? After these 30 days, for years, I saw myself as the silent one, the one who avoided conversations, the one who replayed mistakes in his head, the one who practiced alone but froze in real situations. But now, as I walked through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, I sensed that identity fading away. English no longer felt like a mountain, it felt like a path. A long path, yes, but one I could walk without fear. The small habits had built something stronger than knowledge. They built trust, trust in myself, trust in my voice, trust in my ability to grow. On a quiet evening, I decided to test myself one last time. Not in the way students test themselves. No grammar quizzes, no vocabulary lists, no complicated listening exercises. This test was different. It was about living. I walked into a small cafe I often visited but never spoke much in. The place was calm, soft lights, quiet music, two people working behind the counter. I stepped forward and spoke to them naturally, not rehearsed, not forced, just natural. And in that simple conversation, I realized something powerful. I had crossed the line between practice and life. My words did not come from memorized structures. They came from habit, real habit, built slowly, repeated daily, strengthened through small victories. As I left the cafe, I understood something important. Fluency is not a moment. It is a collection of moments just like this one. Later that night, I opened my notebook again, the same notebook that held my fears, my doubts, my early shaky lines. I wrote down one final truth. Small habits do not create perfection, they create transformation. Each habit had carried a purpose. Listening taught me patience, speaking taught me courage, reading taught me clarity, thinking in English taught me trust, shadowing taught me rhythm, mistakes taught me acceptance, consistency taught me discipline, and together they built a version of me I did not know was possible. The next morning, something happened that confirmed this change. I received an email from someone who needed help with a short English message. In the past, I would have hesitated. I would have taken too long to answer. I would have doubted myself. But this time, I helped without overthinking, without fear, without the old voice in my head questioning everything. When I pressed send, I felt something small but solid: confidence. Not loud, not dramatic, quiet, steady confidence, built from habit, not talent. As the days continued, I noticed new shifts in my daily life. I spoke more freely in English. I wrote messages without checking every word twice. I listened to conversations without translating. I watched videos without focusing on mistakes. My relationship with the language had changed completely. One afternoon, I sat by the window with my notebook open and reviewed all the pages again, from day 1 to day 30. From fear to progress, from hesitation to clarity. And I realized something deeper. The true success of this journey was not learning English, it was learning myself. I understood what motivates me, what scares me, what stops me, what pushes me. And I understood the power of small steps in every area of life. Not just language. Small steps are honest, they are real, they are sustainable, they build strength quietly. As the sun began to set, I understood that this challenge was never about 30 days. It was about who I chose to become after those 30 days. A person who continues, a person who grows, a person who does not wait for perfect moments, a person who builds small moments. English was no longer the finish line. It was the beginning of a new chapter of my life, a chapter where I choose action over fear, practice over doubt, progress over perfection. On the final page of my notebook, I wrote one sentence, a sentence I wish someone had told me years ago. Fluency is not learned, fluency is lived, and that is the truth I carry forward every day. This is the end of the challenge, but not the end of the journey, because journeys built on small habits do not end. They evolve, they continue, they grow, and now you and I stand at the same point, the end of one story, the beginning of another. Subscribe now, join the Bright World English Academy family, and let's start your English learning journey together.